So, welcome back. You'll never guess what we're talking about today. If you watched part 1, I'm sure you have some idea. It's the Renaissance in Italy, with new Christian intellectuals regarding it as the end of the Dark Ages. And what are the Dark Ages? Well, according to these intellectuals, somewhat mistaken, it is the time between Adam's expulsion from Eden and the birth of Christ. The movement known as the Renaissance is a term invented in the 18th century and would become shorthand for the epoch following the Middle Ages. But really, they are part of the same era. Some people say the Middle Ages end around 1300, some say 1350, some say 1450. If we look in England, they will end much later, but for now we have to turn our attention to Italy, where most experts agree the Renaissance begins. This is due to a wide variety of reasons: relatively weak papal authority, relatively strong individuals, constant war, requiring some competition, particularly in the forms of arms race and patronage, but above all else, money. They have the trade, they have the capital, they have the means of production, and like good little Marxists that I'm sure you are, it is the means of production that secure the Renaissance in Italy.
When we look at the start of the Renaissance, we can actually, consider that we have number one, the rediscovery of Greek and Latin texts that were preserved by the Islamists and were then promulgated and distributed to the Christian kingdoms. We can look at some individuals. Now, Petrarch would be the first celebrity for today. Now, Francesco Petrarca lived between 1304 and 1374, had redefined that concept and applied it to his own era. He was a Latin stylist and a tireless advocate for the resuscitation of the classical past. He valued, and his followers as well, and began to espouse what would rise to a new intellectual and artistic movement in Italy, strongly critical of the present and admiring a past that disappeared with Rome's empire.
Here we have Petrarch's copy of Virgil. Petrarch's devotion to the classics of Roman literature prompted him to commission this new frontispiece for his treasured volume of Virgil's poetry. It was painted by the Siamese artist Simone Martini, who, like Petrarch, was attracted, or even attached, one might say, to the papal court at Avignon. It is an intellectual depiction of Virgil in the top right, and his poetic creations, the hero Aeneas, a guy in the armor top left, the farmer and the shepherd, whose humble labors are celebrated in Virgil's lesser works. The figure next to Aeneas is the 4th century scholar Servius, who wrote a famous commentary on Virgil. He is shown drawing aside a curtain to reveal the poet in a creative trance. 2 scrolls proclaim in Latin that Italy was the country that nourished famous poets, that Virgil helped it to achieve the glories of classical Greece. How does this image encapsulate and express Petrarch's devotion to the classical past? Answer in the comments below.
Now let us look at Renaissance classicism. Now, the Renaissance showed significant changes in education and the artistic outlook that began to transform the culture of northern Italy in the late 14th century. It minimized the persistence of Roman thought in the medieval world. The ancient texts had long preserved in monastic libraries were more widely available. And we have the rediscovery of works by Livy, Tacitus, and Lucretius, which expanded the classical canon. There was new awareness of the conceptual gap that separated their contemporary world from antiquity. This awareness awakened determination to recapture ancient worldviews.
A point on translations. The availability of Greek works led Latin translations of Arabic translations of Greek philosophical works to filter in the 12th and 13th centuries. Very few Western Europeans at this point could read Greek. More and more Greek speaking intellectuals will flee to Italy, i.e., from the Mongols and Turks, who will bring their books as well as their language and their knowledge with them. Italian intellectuals had access to these classical texts and would use them differently, primarily for a revival of a rose tinted version of the past as well as critiques of the present. But here we have on the left St. Luke drawing the portrait of the Virgin, and here we have on the right the Lamentation.
Now we have the Renaissance humanism. And humanism, of course, is a program of study that aimed to replace the scholastic emphasis on logic and theology with the study of ancient literature, rhetoric, history, and ethics. The goal of a humanist education was the understanding of the human experience through the lenses of the classical past. Now, humanists wrote in Italian as well as Latin, but they regarded the vernacular literature as suitable only for the uneducated. Serious scholarship was written only in Latin or Greek. Proper Latin had to be the classical Latin of Cicero and Virgil, not the current Latin common to universities, international diplomacy, law, and the church. Now, the Renaissance humanists condemned the living Latin of their day as a barbarous departure from classical standards. Their determination to revive this older language helped to kill off living Latin and led to the triumph of the vernaculars.
Ironic how those who love Latin most ended up putting a sword in its back, but the humanists aside, what humanism really is just an educational program designed to produce virtuous citizens and public officials, and it will largely exclude women. Politically, humanism could be made to serve either the ideals of citizenship of, say, a republic, as in those based on Rome, or the authoritarian agenda of some autocratic ruler who wanted to emulate Roman imperial power. It's the funny thing about Rome, it's either a bastion of liberty or an excuse for imperial rule. Just depends on when you look. But why did all of this start in Italy, I hear you ask?
Well, northern Italy was the most densely populated part of Europe. It differed from the rest of urbanized Europe because aristocratic families customarily lived in cities and became more fully involved in public affairs. Many town dwelling aristocrats were engaged in banking and mercantile enterprises, while many rich mercantile families imitated the manners of aristocracy. Medici made their fortune in banking and commerce and assimilated into the nobility. Newly wealthy families wanted a humanist education for their sons. In Italy, education, not church controlled, and a lot of jobs for the educated in the civic bureaucracies. Also, Italy had no unifying political institutions and looked to the Roman past as a time of glory. Italians appropriated classical culture as their own. Wealth through commercial ventures fueled artistic and intellectual competition. There arose from the intensification of urban pride in cities themselves and became the primary patrons of art and learning.
Thus, the goal of classical education was civic enrichment. Humanists such as Leonardo Bruni, 1370 to 1444, and Leon Battista Alberti, 1404 to 72, would teach that a man's nature, yes, man, because they're sexist, equips him for action, for usefulness to his family and society, as well as, of course, for serving the state. How very Roman of them. Ambition and the quest for glory were notable impulses that ought to be encouraged and channeled toward those ends. They would also refuse to condemn the accumulation of material possessions. Human progress is inseparable from the human dominion of the earth. Humanism of the Renaissance is characterized by a pervasive denigration of women. As an example, Alberti's treatise on the family, 1443. It presents a nuclear family as the fundamental unit of the city-state. Stop me if you've heard that before. Family should mirror the state's organization, thereby consigning women to childbearing, rearing, and, of course, subservience to men. And women should play no role whatsoever within the public sphere.
The influx of new classical texts spurred a new interest in the critical reading of ancient sources. A pioneer in this activity was Lorenzo Valla, from 1407 to 1457. He turned his skill to the analysis of Greek and Latin writings to show how the historical study of language could discredit assumptions and unmask texts as forgeries. He proved that the donation of Constantine could not have been written in the 4th century. He applied Greek to St. Paul's letters, which he believed had been mangled by Jerome's Latin translation. Valla's work was to prove an important link between Renaissance humanism and the Christian humanism that fueled the Reformation. Humanists of northern Italy were aided by the number of Byzantine scholars who had migrated there and taught. Wealthy men aspired to acquire Greek masterpieces, often traveling to Constantinople to acquire manuscripts. They retrieved the works of Sophocles, Euripides, and Thucydides and translated them into Latin, making them accessible to Europeans.
Now, for those looking at the timestamp and asking, well, what about war? What about this? What about the art? What about that? What about all the other things that made the Renaissance the Renaissance? I hear you, I understand. There's so much to the Renaissance, its birth, its start, the wars that impacted it, etc., that we could not fit it all in one video. So, make sure you stick around part 3, where we discuss the 3 main conflicts that make the Renaissance the Renaissance.